So what is up, everyone? Saturn to re-enter Pisces. Big deal always when Saturn does anything in our transiting sky, because Saturn is that great connector to the heavens. It's that planetary sphere through which Saturn is the gatekeeper, you might say. And so we get Saturn coming back into Pisces. Now the advantage of this is that Saturn has already been there recently. And so we have 2 years of evidence to work with and explore as we're preparing for these fall months. It's the advantage of it. There's an intensification with Saturn. There may be more gyrations. I think a metaphor of like the seas that can get tumultuous in terms of a navigation would fit not only with Saturn being a planet of challenge and of requiring real all hands on deck discipline, to go with this seafaring metaphor. It's the planet of seafaring in the ancient tradition because it's the unknown. It's the unknown. And just like I was saying before, as you breach Saturn, that realm of Saturn in these ancient cosmologies, you're now into realms above the planetary spheres. There's the realm of the fixed stars, and then other realms, empyreum, these kind of final divine realms that are beyond the planetary spheres. But Saturn is that gateway. And so we're gonna need all hands on deck here in some ways, I think, potentially this week, especially with the lunar eclipse in Pisces being right here within the week of Saturn's ingress. It's kind of a week of like, hey, things are wild, things are crazy, things may be changing a lot this week as major planetary shifts happen. And I know I talked about that some in my last video, but in this video, what I want to get into is some of the news stories looking at the mundane astrology of Saturn and Pisces as we return to themes from the last 2 years. And I'm going to look at in this video Saturn and Pisces in the 1990s. The research I've done has included those periods to try to see if we can augment what we've just gone through by reflecting it against that recent history, or the last time Saturn was in Pisces. Before we do that, I want to come back and pontificate on this idea of the challenges of Saturn and Pisces. And remember, challenge is good. I want to reiterate that. Saturn can be wonderfully positive for our lives. It's part of the whole. It's part of this grand mix of our lives. You might say the panoply. Everything that's on offer in this reality, or the canvas of colors and the wide variety of colors. Saturn is darker or black in the ancient texts, but you have all kinds of colors. What would life be without black? I mean, I was just doing some design here earlier, and black text on white or off-white is the classic way you read a book. You couldn't see the letters. You couldn't make out the words unless you had dark hues like black to counterbalance white. It allows you to see, right? So Saturn is absolutely necessary, and there's nothing to be afraid of at one level by acknowledging it and talking about it as a planet of challenge. Because what is life without challenge? It's nothing, really. I mean, there's a challenge. Every day is challenge to wake up and to get our lives in order and to meet our responsibilities and to feel our feelings and to go deep with what we're called here to do. I mean, it's almost the definition of existence. And this is why I think the symbol set of astrology, the 7 planets and the 12 signs of the zodiac, embedded in that symbol set, it's nearly everything we can experience. And so there's this kind of totalizing way that astrology becomes a language that with its symbols you can communicate almost anything, like any language. Spanish is a language. It has different words than English, than Russian, which uses the Cyrillic script as the Russian language, right? Different letters, different words, but you communicate ideas. Almost the total set of ideas can be communicated with that method or that language. And so astrology is like that. The planets and the signs are all necessary because they're all components, symbol components of a working symbol set that allows us to communicate the fullness of life. Saturn is a good thing. It's a necessary thing. In fact, necessity is a key word of Saturn, and that might be something to think about here. As Saturn comes back to Pisces, the part of our charts that Pisces comprises, there's necessary things that are still yet to do there. And September, October, November, December, January, and then into February, Saturn will finish out its time there. It will station direct right at the end of November, I think the 28th. So look for that to be a pivot, where maybe it's very clear what has been necessary for us in the Pisces sector, and that we're now clearing with that final pass or that final foundation laying piece before that parting gift of Saturn in our Pisces sector emerges. December, January, and then February 14th, Saturn leaves Pisces. So there's the opportunity here with Saturn to lay that foundation, finish out the process of what it's been doing in your Pisces sector. And then just remember, 7 September is the fated emergences combined with Saturn. And so look for some breakthrough potentially here beginning of September with that eclipse in Pisces to help guide you with your process of necessity with the Saturn and Pisces transit. Okay, so let's shift out of that. Just some quick reminders here of how to play it maybe in our own personal lives and delineating it outside of the mundane here as we start this video. We know it's an overlap period. That's another thing that's very important to say right now. Saturn is back in Pisces, yes, but the Saturn and Aries stories have kicked off. The worlds that Saturn and Aries has begun are not gone now that Saturn comes back to Pisces. In fact, it's just an overlap. So it's a transition period or an overlap period where we have our Saturn and Aries stories having begun and our Saturn and Pisces stories needing conclusion. So keep that in mind. This isn't something like it's a hard boundary here when you see planets going back over like this. Like if you have Saturn and Aries and you're having a Saturn return that's just begun, or you have Saturn and Pisces and your Saturn return is completing, both are true right now. I mean, both of those nativities are still in the Saturn returns and they're still working through the events. Remember, life is a flow. The factual emergences of our lives is a flow. We know that events arise and then we work through them and then they end and then we're over events. When you lay the astrological timing onto the natural flow of life, very often it matches, sometimes not as abruptly as the movement of planets through the ephemeris. And it's not just like because Saturn's back into Pisces, your Saturn and Aries stuff just goes away overnight. Though I do think we may get a little bit of relief here with whatever's been challenging for you this summer, and a little bit of the edge may come off, though likely we're still grappling with whatever those themes are from this summer. It's just we get a little bit of a pause and maybe a period to add some more to the mix so that it's not as overwhelming or as intense. And then of course it reemerges in full in February next year. And that's another thing to keep in mind with Saturn back in Pisces. It's preparing, like I said in my last video, for Saturn and Aries in earnest and in full next February. So okay, that said, I want to come in. I saw this story this week. It was going around the internet. This was from Popular Mechanics, an article by Elizabeth Rain, published on 12 August 2025. Here's the headline. Your consciousness can jump through time, meaning gut feelings are memories from the future, scientists say. And then the subtitle was, even the CIA has publicly released data on psychic phenomenon. And then this tweet was from an account called Massimo. He's summarizing the article as this: cognitive neuroscientist Julia Mossbridge says these memories from the future could mean the notion of time might not be as linear as we imagine. Memories from the future events reverberating back into the present. It sounds a lot to me like time is a circle, astrology, time is a circle, right? Planets move through the circle of the zodiac. There is circular, repetitive events that happen. There's events in the future that can be sent back. For example, as we prepare for Saturn and Aries, as we prepare for any ingress of a planet, sometimes it starts before the planet actually enters the sign. And the reason why I mention this is that this is quintessential Piscean. The notion of dreams as predictive or future events being able to be intuited in the present. The idea that time gets loose. Remember, Pisces is that final sign of the zodiac. We're back to the beginning, right, in Pisces. You have the beginning in Aries, and then Pisces brings you back to a place you already were. And so there's a kind of finalization and a dissipation into the beginning again. And I just want to encourage you with a story like this. I mean, part of why that's so interesting is that we're still in this Saturn and Pisces zone of time. This comes out with Saturn and Aries, the story. These CIA admissions have been around for a long time, but it's that this evokes or is evocative of the Piscean archetype, which is feeling into the intuition, the seas of interconnectivity in unseen realms, such that time might not even be clear in terms of how we structure it. Remember, it's a water sign of mutability. It's that free-flowing internal states that Pisces is, where we're shifting and altering and unclear even where we are. We've come from somewhere, we're going somewhere, but we're in an in-between zone, and it's one of depth and power, and that is the Piscean. So that's very much like time speaking to me now. Well, what about the past? Is that real then? How we think about the past would be completely altered by a story like this, because the future then becomes the present, and then the present is the past, or it can get kind of trippy and strange and hard to even articulate, actually, when we start thinking about stuff like this. But you can use can use the element, right? You can juxtapose this with Aquarius, which is very much a sign of the intellect and of the ordering. And you can just see how when you have the water element involved, the mutability involved, and Jupiter, it's like the search for truth in this unknown between state where we have to acknowledge that truth is maybe stranger than fiction, to use that phrase. Acknowledge that there may have been fiction writers. This is what Philip K. Dick said. He said he was writing about different pasts and different presents that were just as real, but that weren't what we were able to perceive. He certainly believed that time was highly strange, you know, that we were living in an overlaid reality, but we were actually living back in the time of the Roman Empire and Christ and the disciples and early Christianity. We were caught in like a time loop where we couldn't break free from that. Go read his work, Exegesis, Valis. These texts play with this notion of what time and reality actually is. I just lay all this out because if you're experiencing that, especially here in September with the lunar eclipse in Pisces and Saturn back in Pisces, just go with it. You know, you're not wrong if you're thinking about time and how time operates. And I've said this before recently, but I mean, dreams have been really big in my summer. A lot of dream realm stuff where I'm seeing the dream realm maybe isn't often so separate from the waking realm. And I won't go into a lot of details there, but I do think there are experiences we can have and that may increasingly be coming online with Saturn in Pisces and that eclipse in Pisces. 1st September, Saturn enters Pisces. The eclipse in Pisces is on 7th September. But really all of this 5 months of Saturn back into Pisces, you know, you may want to be laying these new foundations in your cosmological and time structure understanding of reality. And often this can be brought back into spiritual beliefs or cosmological beliefs, philosophical beliefs, which is of the nature of Jupiter, Jupiter the domicile lord of Pisces. So I encourage you to do that. Let Saturn lay those foundations, and you may be integrating experiences that are, quote, tripped out or, quote, paranormal into the foundation of how you view reality and your personal philosophies. 3 periods I'm going to look at. 21 May 1993 until 30 June 1993. That was Saturn in Pisces, the first time in the early 90s. Saturn re-entered Pisces on 28 January 1994 until 7 April 96. So those are the first 2 periods from the 90s that I went back and pulled stories from. And then the third period is the one we've just gone through, 7 March 2023 until 25 May 2025. The tech changes of Saturn and Pisces have been wild. And remember, as Saturn came to Pisces, the internet is invented with Saturn and Aries, and then Saturn and Pisces is when the internet really expands creatively. Listing a few of these things, you had Amazon founded, July 1994, August 1995, Windows 95 was released. There was, I think, some other websites. I think Yahoo was launched as well. But there was just the whole growth of the internet. Websites are being developed, and a lot of the businesses that were part of that foundational layer of the last 30 years came online. And then the other stuff in the 90s, which was, I think, very interesting when you compare to what we've just gone through with Saturn and Pisces. You had Jurassic Park, the movie, in 11 June 1993, which pioneered CGI in film. You had on 22 November 95, Toy Story, the film premiered, the first all CGI feature film. And so there was that major new computerized tech, right? Reality was able to be computerized, simulated. I think that there's something highly evocative about what we're living through now, because when we come to our transit of Saturn and Pisces, 30 March 2023, GPT-4 becomes widely available. But all of the developments, even from 2003 to where we are now with Midjourney and image generation and video AI generation, that's all way, way different now. I mean, AI generated content is everywhere, and it's all been during Saturn and Pisces. The rise of AI, effectively, it matches and is analogous to the rise of CGI and the rise of the internet from Saturn and Pisces before. To me, this is about Saturn. To me, this is about Saturn being technology. It's the foundation layer of a society. It rules air signs, Libra and Aquarius, so we already know it's technological just using astrological assignments over the elements. Saturn is technology. It creates new layers of technology that societies build upon. That's what Saturn is itself. But to bring it through creative and expansive Pisces, that's where the delineation really shines, and it explains clearly why you would have expansions and creative applications of new tech. Saturn tech layer combines with the Jupiterian and Venusian, Piscean, mutable, expansive, creative energies. We're living through a lot of that. So I don't think we're quite done with some, big tech upheavals, and look for that this fall. New image generation. I was going to say, this is the story I saw that relates to this, was AI image editing has just changed in the last week. This is August 26th, and Google released something called Nano Banana. When you use the Gemini AI suite, you can just put an image in. I did it with my own. I put a picture of myself in. I said, put me with a Savile Row suit on, make my beard long, and I created these versions of myself that looked pretty good. But the stuff people are doing, one other thing I saw was that someone was putting like an old map of New Amsterdam, so New York City before it was called New York City, and Nano Banana video editing would generate what it would look like if you were in that map. And it was showing like what it looked like, a depiction, an AI generated pretty realistic depiction of like what it would be like to live in New Amsterdam. It's pretty impressive. And if this stuff keeps accelerating, where could this go? Simulated real-time worlds where you don't even know where you are. It's so real. Some people say this is evidence that what we think is real is a simulation, that we're in a computer simulation now that's so real and so advanced that all we're doing is building out tech to kind of catch up with what we're already in. And that's where I think it relates to what I talked about at the beginning here, of like a world where time is unclear. The future may be sending us messages in the present. Well, that kind of fits with this idea of simulated worlds that AI is allowing us to do, and how we might be on the breakthrough of some kind of new understandings. Remember, Saturn, Neptune conjoin end of February 2026 in the first degree of the zodiac. That alone tells us there can be some major new breakthroughs of initiations at really deep and profound levels for the human collective experience. And I think the Piscean creative expansions with tech will lend themselves to some kind of new cardinal Aries initiations here, technologically speaking, over the next few years, and maybe as soon as 2026 with maybe some even bigger breakthrough, like scientists prove we are in a simulation, or we communicated with a future self, or a lot of people are into UAP and aliens. I'm not as much into that, but whatever it is, I think there's some major breakthroughs we could be on the cusp of. Saturn and Pisces finishing out its time there may help as we expand even further and more creatively with these breakthroughs that we're living through. So, okay, this is the value of astrology. We don't even have to have an agenda. I just think compassion is a major theme as well with the Piscean, and with Saturn there, compassion is required when there's suffering. Those two words are linked directly. You deploy compassion when you see other people suffering. You give yourself compassion when you're suffering. And so that's why Saturn relates to compassion. I think compassion can be a uniquely Saturn and Pisces delineation, because you get the sadness of Saturn in the empathetic truth and unifying Pisces, and you then get compassion. So I know I said it in my last video, repeating it here again, where can you seek to reach out to people and to lend a kind of compassionate heart where you're able to do good, and where you feel like that's an appropriate for the boundaries of that relational context. I think that's the dark side of Pisces, and maybe the dark side of Saturn and Pisces, is that we're just too open and we let people come in and step over their boundaries, take advantage of our goodwill or our compassionate tendency. And so you'll have to walk that dance, and hopefully Saturn and Pisces can give you a container through which to deploy compassion when it's going to be most useful, and have boundaries so that you're not just bleeding and feeling everything for everyone at the risk of your own sanity or your own functionality or something like this. So anyhow, that's this video, everyone. Have a great September, okay? Have a great Saturn back into Pisces. Have a great eclipse. I will have another video out before that eclipse. I'm going to look at the technical chart of that Pisces lunar eclipse and talk about some of the themes in that chart. The big thing I want to focus on is Jupiter in Cancer. That's huge for this eclipse. We're back to Jupiter in Cancer now, but I will be releasing that video, so look for that, and have a beautiful time until then. You can always follow me on Patreon, SJAnderson144 over there. Link is in the description. More videos. Like and subscribe here if you're so inclined, and I'll talk to you real soon, okay? Peace. Take care. Bye-bye.